Involution, the machine that makes human beings crush themselves. There are societies that do not destroy people through war, but through a race with no destination. No gunfire, no bloodshed, no prison bars in plain sight. Just millions of people waking up every morning, pushing themselves, forcing themselves, comparing themselves, punishing themselves, and calling all of it effort. That is when a civilization enters its most terrifying phase. It no longer needs to beat you with a whip, because it has already taught you to beat yourself. It no longer needs to lock you inside a cage, because it has convinced you that running inside the cage is freedom. The name of that thing is involution. And if you look deeply enough, you will see this. Involution is not merely excessive competition. It is the moment an entire society begins to function like a massive machine, grinding youth into productivity, grinding dignity into achievement, grinding human beings into replaceable parts. 1. What involution really is. Involution is when everyone is forced to give more, yet no one truly moves forward. You study more, but you do not feel more secure. You work more, but the future does not become clearer. You try harder, but life does not open up. It only tightens around you. In the past, effort could create distance. Today, effort only keeps you from falling. In the past, striving was a way to rise. Now, striving is merely a way to avoid being erased. That is the dark turning point. Because from that moment on, labor is no longer tied to hope. It becomes tied to fear. You do not study in order to grow, but in order not to lose. You do not work in order to build a life, but in order not to be replaced. You do not improve yourself in order to live more deeply, but in order to fit the standards of a system that is becoming more and more soulless. That is what involution is. It makes an entire society accelerate together, while the destination never actually moves forward. Only the level of exhaustion rises. 2. It does not appear out of nowhere. No society wakes up one morning and suddenly goes mad. Involution is fed little by little, through sentences that sound completely reasonable. If you want a good life, you have to be better than others. If you want a future, you have to sacrifice more than others. If you do not want to be eliminated, you must be stronger, faster, tougher than everyone else. At first glance, that sounds like ambition. But when an entire society swallows that logic whole, it turns into a bottomless escalation. One person studies more, then everyone has to study more. One person works 10 hours, someone else must work 12. One person has a degree, someone else must have a degree, plus experience, plus certificates, plus internships, plus an almost limitless capacity for endurance. And then what used to be an advantage becomes the minimum. What used to be sacrifice becomes obligation. What used to be extraordinary becomes normal. That is when a society enters a very modern nightmare. Everyone is running, but no one dares to ask why they are running. 3. The darkest part. It turns exploitation into moral virtue. This is the deepest layer of involution. It does not merely exploit people. It makes people honor that exploitation. Sleeping less becomes a sign of strength. Working until collapse becomes a sign of responsibility. Having no personal life becomes a sign of professionalism. Sacrificing your health, your mind, your youth becomes proof of ambition. And anyone who wants to live at a human pace, anyone who wants to preserve their breath, their rhythm, their soul, anyone who does not want to turn life into an assembly line of efficiency is seen as backward, weak, not hungry enough, not driven enough, not competitive enough. Do you see the cruelty in that? The most ruthless system is not the one that openly crushes you. It is the one that makes you feel ashamed if you do not willingly crush yourself. That is the coldest form of power. It no longer needs to force you from the outside. It enters your mind and turns you into the warden of your own prison. 4. When a human being is turned into a performance project. Involution does not just steal time. It steals the language people use to understand themselves. You no longer ask, who am I? What am I living for? What makes this life meaningful? Am I truly alive or merely surviving? All of those questions are replaced by the language of the market. Is my resume strong enough? Am I competitive enough? What certificate am I still missing? What skill am I still lacking? How much more do I need to upgrade myself just to remain relevant? Little by little, the human being is severed from the core of their own being and reassembled into a product that must be more polished, faster, more durable, cheaper, more efficient, more easily replaceable. Youth is no longer a season of discovery. It becomes a battlefield where you must prove your usefulness. Human value no longer lies in depth, but in how long a person can be extracted from before they finally break. That is the most horrifying moment. Because when a society begins to evaluate human beings like rechargeable batteries, like processors, like disposable resources, that society is no longer developing. It is merely becoming more sophisticated in the way it devours people. 5. Why an entire generation is exhausted. Because they are living inside a structure that never allows them to feel they are enough. You finish one thing, and another higher standard appears immediately. You reach one milestone, and another demand rises at once. You barely have time to breathe, and the rules of the race have already changed. You barely manage to stand, and the crowd is already being ordered to run again. The exhaustion of this generation is not simply the exhaustion of doing too much. They are exhausted because there is nowhere they can lay themselves down without guilt. Even rest feels anxious. Stopping feels shameful. Slowing down feels like losing. Not optimizing every day feels like falling behind. This is no longer effort. It is a life poisoned by the feeling of never being enough. And when a person is trapped for too long inside that feeling, they slowly lose the ability to sense their own worth unless some external achievement confirms it. At that point, their soul is no longer standing on the ground. It is suspended in the air, hanging from grades, KPIs, salary, titles, and the eyes of other people. A person like that may still appear to be alive, but inside, they are being hollowed out day by day. 6. The most brutal blow. The most brutal thing about involution is not that it forces people to suffer. It is that it forces them to suffer, and in the end still leaves them empty. You study for years, and still do not feel the future is secure. You work yourself to exhaustion, and still do not feel peace. You constantly upgrade yourself, yet the more you upgrade, the more you begin to feel like a product rather than a human being. This is the blow that breaks so many people. Not failure, but success according to the system's rules, and still finding your life meaningless. That is when people begin to understand a very cold truth. There are games where the problem is not that you are bad at playing. The problem is that the game itself was designed to wear you down, whether you win or lose. If you lose, you are eliminated. If you win, you are drained dry. That is the perfect design of a machine with no exit. 7. When involution crushes faith itself. A human being can endure enormous pressure as long as they still believe their effort leads to a life worth having. But involution destroys that very belief. It slowly makes people realize, I am no longer building a future. I am merely postponing the moment I get swallowed whole. I no longer study in order to understand. I study in order to qualify. I no longer work in order to create value. I work in order not to be replaced. I no longer live in order to unfold. I live in order not to fall behind. And when a generation begins to see that the entire structure they are pouring their sweat into has no real promise of dignity, freedom, or peace, then inside them, the fire no longer burns with purpose. It burns with exhaustion. And a society in which millions of people continue to function, while no longer believing in the meaning of what they are doing, is a society that has already entered a phase of inner decay. Conclusion. Perhaps the most terrifying thing about involution is not that it makes people tired. It is that it makes people get used to being worn down, used to living without truly being alive, used to exhaustion while still feeling insufficient, used to slicing themselves into skills, achievements, metrics, market value, until they forget that they were once a human being. Involution is the moment a civilization no longer needs to destroy people through crude violence, because it has learned how to make people destroy themselves obediently, methodically, and with shame if they do not destroy themselves deeply enough. A society that forces human beings to run themselves to death just for the right to remain standing still is not a strong society. It is a society that is quietly devouring its own future. And when that happens, the first thing to die is not only health, not only youth, not only dreams, it is human dignity.